The rain hammered against the windows of the 32nd floor of the Meridian Financial Tower in downtown Seattle as I stared at my computer screen, watching months of my life's work being presented to the board of directors. But I wasn't the one presenting it. My boss, Richard Hartwell, stood confidently at the head of the mahogany conference table, his perfectly pressed navy suit commanding attention as he clicked through slides that contained every detail, every analysis, every innovative solution I had painstakingly developed over the past 6 months. My name was Sage, and I was a senior financial analyst at Cromwell and Partners, one of the most prestigious investment firms on the West Coast. I had been with the company for 3 years, working my way up from junior analyst to my current position, and this project was supposed to be my breakthrough moment. The comprehensive market analysis and investment strategy I had created for our largest client, Pacific Northwest Energy Corporation, was groundbreaking. It identified untapped renewable energy markets worth over $2 billion and provided a detailed roadmap for expansion that could revolutionize their business model. I had spent countless nights in the office, analyzing market trends, conducting interviews with industry experts, and creating financial models that would make any MBA professor proud. The coffee shop on the ground floor had become my second home, and the security guard, Carlos, had started keeping extra sandwiches for me since I worked so late most nights. This wasn't just any project. It was the kind of work that could define a career, the kind that gets you noticed by the C-suite executives who make decisions about promotions and corner offices. But as I sat in the back of the conference room, watching Richard present my ideas as if they were his own brilliant insights, I felt a familiar knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't the first time he had taken credit for my work, but it was by far the most significant. The previous instances had been smaller projects, internal reports, or client proposals that stayed within our department. This time, however, the stakes were different. The entire executive team was present, including CEO Margaret Chen, a woman I had admired from afar for her intelligence and no-nonsense approach to business. Richard had a talent for making himself indispensable while keeping his team members invisible. He was a master of corporate politics, always knowing exactly what to say and when to say it. His ability to network and schmooze had earned him his position as department head, but his actual analytical skills were mediocre at best. I had been essentially running the department's most important projects for the past year, while he took credit and collected the accolades. As I listened to him explain his innovative approach to market segmentation, I remembered the weekend I had spent at my small apartment in Capitol Hill, surrounded by spreadsheets and industry reports, finally having the breakthrough that led to this strategy. I had been so excited that I had called my best friend Emma at midnight to share the discovery. She had listened patiently as I explained how I had identified the connection between demographic shifts and energy consumption patterns that everyone else had missed. The presentation continued, and I watched the faces of the executives around the table. They were impressed, asking thoughtful questions about implementation timelines and resource allocation. Richard answered smoothly, though I noticed he was essentially repeating the talking points from the executive summary I had prepared for him. When CFO David Rodriguez asked about the risk assessment methodology, Richard's response was almost word for word from Section 4 of my report. Margaret Chen leaned forward during the discussion of market penetration strategies, her keen eyes focused on the projections displayed on the wall-mounted screen. "This is exceptional work, Richard," she said, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the youngest CEOs in the financial sector. "The depth of analysis and the innovative approach to market entry are exactly what we need to stay competitive. I'm particularly impressed by the demographic correlation analysis. How did you develop this methodology?" I felt my jaw clench as Richard launched into an explanation of his process, describing the late nights and creative thinking that had led to the breakthrough. Every word was a lie, every gesture a performance. He was stealing not just my work, but my passion, my dedication, my very identity as a professional. I had poured my heart into this project, and he was wearing it like a tailored suit. After the presentation ended and the executives filed out, congratulating Richard on his outstanding work, I remained in my seat, staring at the now blank projection screen. My colleague Jake, who sat next to me, leaned over and whispered, Great work on the project, Sage. Too bad you're not the one getting the credit. His comment hit me like a physical blow because it confirmed what I already knew. Everyone in the department was aware of what was happening, but no one was willing to speak up. Corporate culture at Cromwell and Partners was built on hierarchy and loyalty to your immediate supervisor. Going over your boss's head was considered career suicide, and most people preferred to keep their heads down and hope for the best. As the rain continued to streak down the windows, I made a decision that would change everything. I couldn't let this stand. I had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to watch someone else reap the rewards of my labor. But I also knew that a direct confrontation would be futile. Richard was too skilled at office politics, and I was too low on the corporate ladder to challenge him openly. I needed a different approach, something subtle, but devastating. As I packed up my laptop and headed back to my desk, an idea began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially career-ending if it backfired, but it was also poetic justice. Sometimes the best revenge comes not from grand gestures, but from the smallest details that others overlook. The file name. Every document I had created for this project was meticulously organized and saved with detailed file names that included my initials, the date, and a brief description of the content. Richard had simply copied the files to his computer and presented them, but he hadn't bothered to rename them. If someone looked closely enough, they would see the digital fingerprints of the real author. The next morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only follows a Seattle rainstorm. I sat at my desk in the open-plan office area, watching Richard through the glass walls of his corner office as he basked in the afterglow of yesterday's presentation. He was on a conference call, probably with another client, gesturing enthusiastically as he described his innovative approach to market analysis. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was likely using talking points from another one of my reports. I had spent the previous evening at my apartment, sitting on my small balcony overlooking the city lights, thinking about my next move. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried that fresh, clean smell that made everything seem possible. I had made my decision, but I needed to be strategic about the execution. My computer screen displayed the shared drive where all our department's files were stored. I clicked through the folders until I found the Pacific Northwest Energy Project directory. There it was, a folder named PN Market Analysis Final, containing dozens of documents, spreadsheets, and presentation files. Each file told a story, not just through its content, but through its metadata, its creation date, and most importantly, its original name. I opened the main strategy document, the one Richard had presented yesterday. The file properties showed it had been created on my computer under my user account at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night 3 months ago. I remembered that night clearly. I had been working late, fueled by determination and too much coffee, when I finally cracked the code on the demographic analysis that became the cornerstone of the entire strategy. The original file name was PNE Demo Correlation Analysis SCV3. Docs? SC being my initials. Sage Cooper. Richard had simply copied the file to his computer and renamed it Market Strategy RRH Final.docx for his presentation, but he hadn't bothered to clear the document's revision history or change the author metadata. Any IT professional worth their salt would be able to trace the true origins of the work. But I needed more than just digital evidence. I needed a way to bring this information to light without appearing vindictive or unprofessional. Corporate environments are delicate ecosystems where perception matters as much as reality, and I couldn't afford to be seen as a disgruntled employee making accusations. That's when I remembered the upcoming quarterly review meeting with the CEO. Margaret Chen had a reputation for being thorough and detail-oriented, often asking to review the actual working documents behind major presentations. She believed in understanding not just the conclusions, but the methodology and thought processes that led to them. If I could find a way to make sure she saw the original files, she would discover the truth on her own. I spent the morning crafting a carefully worded email to Margaret's assistant, Rebecca, whom I had met several times during company events. Rebecca was professional but approachable, and she had always been friendly to me. I explained that I had some additional supporting documents and analysis that might be useful for the CEO's review of the Pacific Northwest Energy Project. I offered to organize all the working files and background research into a comprehensive folder that would give her a complete picture of the project's development. Rebecca responded within an hour, thanking me for my proactive approach and asking me to prepare the materials for Margaret's review. She mentioned that the CEO appreciated when team members took initiative to provide thorough documentation, especially for projects of this magnitude. As I began organizing the files, I made sure to preserve all the original file names and metadata. Every document told the story of its creation: late-night work sessions, weekend research, iterative improvements, and breakthrough moments. The timestamp on the files painted a clear picture of the project's evolution, showing how the strategy had developed over months of dedicated work. I also included my original project notes, handwritten planning documents that I had scanned and saved, and email correspondence with external industry experts who had provided insights for the analysis. These communications were all in my name, showing that I had been the one building relationships and gathering intelligence that informed the strategy. The most damning evidence, however, was the presentation file itself. When I opened it in edit mode, the revision history showed every change, every addition, every modification. The original slides had been created on my computer, under my user account, and the final version that Richard had presented still contained hidden comments and notes that I had made during the development process. By mid-afternoon, I had assembled a comprehensive digital portfolio that documented not just the final strategy, but the entire creative and analytical process that had led to its development. It was a masterpiece of project documentation, and more importantly, it was an irrefutable record of authorship. I delivered the files to Rebecca personally, walking up to the executive floor with a confidence I hadn't felt in months. The executive offices were a world apart from the cubicles and open workspace where I spent my days. The carpet was thicker, the lighting softer, and the air seemed to hum with the weight of important decisions. "This is incredibly thorough, Sage," Rebecca said as she reviewed the folder structure on her computer. "Margaret will be impressed by the level of detail. She's always talking about how important it is to understand the full story behind our major initiatives." As I walked back to my desk, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. I had set the wheels in motion, but I couldn't control what would happen next. I had given Margaret Chen all the information she needed to discover the truth, but I had done it in a way that appeared helpful and professional rather than accusatory. The rest of the day passed slowly. I tried to focus on my other projects, but my mind kept wandering to the files sitting in Margaret's inbox. I wondered when she would review them, what she would think when she saw the original file names, and how she would react to the revelation that the work she had praised so highly had been created by someone other than the person who had presented it. Richard seemed oblivious to what was happening. He spent most of the day in meetings, probably discussing how to leverage his successful presentation into new opportunities. He even stopped by my desk in the late afternoon to assign me a new project, speaking with the casual authority of someone who had no idea that his world was about to change. "Great work supporting the Pacific Northwest Energy presentation," he said, as if I had been merely a research assistant rather than the architect of the entire strategy. "I'm going to need you to start working on a similar analysis for our automotive sector clients. I think we can replicate the success we had with the energy project." I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the dutiful subordinate. "Of course, Richard. I'll get started on the preliminary research right away." As he walked away, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. He was already planning to steal credit for my next project, completely unaware that his days of taking credit for my work were numbered. The digital trail I had laid would lead directly to the truth, and soon everyone would know who had really created the strategy that had impressed the CEO so much. 3 days later, I was at my desk reviewing market data when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca's extension, and my heart rate immediately accelerated. I had been expecting this call, but that didn't make it any less nerve-wracking. "Hi, Sage. This is Rebecca from the CEO's office. Margaret would like to meet with you this afternoon at 3 p.m. to discuss the Pacific Northwest Energy Project documentation you provided. She's asked me to set up a conference room on the executive floor." I glanced at my computer clock. 11:30 a.m. I had 3.5 hours to prepare for what could be the most important meeting of my career. Of course, Rebecca. I'll be there. Should I bring anything specific? Just bring your laptop and any additional notes you might have about the project development process. Margaret mentioned she was particularly interested in understanding the methodology behind the demographic analysis. After hanging up, I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth was approaching, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. I had initiated this process, but I couldn't predict exactly how it would unfold. I spent the next few hours reviewing my notes and preparing for potential questions. I organized my thoughts about the project development timeline, the research methodology, and the key insights that had led to the breakthrough analysis. I wanted to be able to explain clearly and professionally how the strategy had been developed, without sounding defensive or accusatory. At 2:50 p.m., I made my way to the executive floor, carrying my laptop and a folder of supplementary materials. The conference room Rebecca had reserved was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay and a polished table that could seat 12 people. Margaret Chen was already there, reviewing documents on her tablet, her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression focused and serious. "Sage, thank you for coming," she said, looking up as I entered. "Please have a seat. I've been reviewing the project files you provided, and I have some questions about the development process." I sat down across from her, setting my laptop on the table. Margaret's reputation for directness was well earned, and I appreciated that she got straight to the point. "I'm particularly interested in the demographic correlation analysis," she continued. "It's a sophisticated approach that I haven't seen implemented in our industry before. Can you walk me through how this methodology was developed?" This was my moment. I had spent months developing this analysis, and I knew every detail of the process. I began explaining how I had identified the gap in traditional market analysis approaches, how I had researched demographic trends across different regions, and how I had discovered the correlation between population shifts and energy consumption patterns that everyone else had missed. As I spoke, Margaret's expression grew more attentive. She asked probing questions about data sources, statistical methods, and validation processes. These were questions that went far beyond the surface-level understanding that Richard had demonstrated in his presentation. "The file metadata shows this work was created over a period of several months," she said, looking at her tablet. "The original file names indicate extensive iterative development. This represents a significant time investment." I nodded. Yes, it was about 6 months of work, including nights and weekends. The breakthrough came when I realized that existing models were treating demographic data as static, when it's actually highly dynamic and predictive of future consumption patterns. Margaret made notes on her tablet as I spoke. "I'm looking at the presentation file that Richard showed to the board. The revision history shows it was originally created on your computer, under your user account. The file name was PNE Demo Correlation Analysis SCV3 Docs, before it was renamed for the presentation." The room fell silent for a moment. Margaret's statement wasn't a question. It was an observation that carried significant implications. I felt my pulse quicken, but I maintained my composure. "Yes, that's correct," I said simply. "I developed the analysis and created the presentation materials. The SC in the file name stands for my initials." Margaret nodded slowly. "I see. And Richard presented this work to the board as his own original analysis." I chose my words carefully. "Richard is my supervisor, and he's responsible for presenting departmental work to the executive team. I assume he was representing the department's collective efforts." But Margaret wasn't fooled by my diplomatic response. She had been in corporate leadership long enough to recognize the difference between a supervisor presenting teamwork and someone claiming individual credit for another person's ideas. "Sage, I want you to understand something," she said, leaning forward slightly. "This company succeeds because of the talent and dedication of our team members. When I see work of this caliber, I want to ensure that the people responsible for it are recognized and rewarded appropriately." She paused, looking directly at me. "I also want to ensure that our management structure supports and develops that talent rather than obscuring it." The implications of her words were clear. Margaret had figured out exactly what had happened. and she wasn't pleased about it. But she was handling the situation with the same professional discretion that had made her successful. "I'd like you to present this analysis directly to the board next week," she continued. "We're having a follow-up meeting with the Pacific Northwest Energy executives, and I want them to hear from the person who actually developed the strategy. Can you prepare a comprehensive presentation that covers not just the conclusions, but the methodology and implementation roadmap?" I felt a surge of excitement mixed with vindication. "Absolutely. I'd be honored to present to the board." "Excellent. Rebecca will coordinate with you on the scheduling and logistics." Margaret closed her tablet and looked at me with an expression that was both serious and supportive. "Sage, I want you to know that this kind of innovative thinking is exactly what we need to stay competitive. I'm impressed not just by the quality of your work, but by your professionalism in how you've handled this situation." As I left the conference room, I felt like I was walking on air. The truth was out, and it had been revealed in exactly the way I had hoped, through the quality of my work speaking for itself. Margaret Chen had seen through the deception without me having to make accusations or create drama. But I also knew that this revelation would have consequences. Richard's credibility had been quietly but definitively undermined, and there would be a reckoning. The corporate ecosystem was about to shift, and I was at the center of that change. When I returned to my desk, I noticed Richard was in his office, on what appeared to be a tense phone call. I wondered if he had already been contacted about the upcoming board presentation, or if he was still unaware of what had transpired in the conference room upstairs. Either way, the dynamic between us had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the invisible analyst whose work could be appropriated without consequence. I was about to step into the spotlight, and everyone would see who had really created the strategy that had impressed the CEO. The board presentation was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and I spent the weekend preparing with an intensity that surpassed even my original work on the project. This wasn't just about presenting my analysis. It was about establishing my credibility and professional reputation at the highest levels of the company. I practiced my presentation multiple times, refining my delivery and anticipating questions. I wanted to be confident, but not arrogant, thorough, but not overwhelming. This was my opportunity to show the executive team and the Pacific Northwest Energy clients that I wasn't just a skilled analyst, but a strategic thinker who could drive business results. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. I arrived at the office to find an email from HR requesting a meeting with me at 10 a.m. My initial reaction was anxiety. HR meetings were rarely good news, but as I thought about the timing, I realized this was likely connected to the situation with Richard. The HR meeting was conducted by Sandra Mitchell, the Vice President of Human Resources, a woman known for her fair but firm approach to personnel issues. She was accompanied by James Parker, the Director of Legal Affairs, which suggested this was more than a routine check-in. "Sage, thank you for coming," Sandra began. "We wanted to discuss the Pacific Northwest Energy Project and ensure we have a clear understanding of the work attribution and development process." I realized that Margaret Chen had likely briefed HR on the situation, and they were conducting their own investigation. This was standard corporate procedure when there were questions about work ownership or potential misconduct. "We've reviewed the project files and documentation," James added. "The digital evidence clearly shows the development timeline and authorship of the work. We want to give you an opportunity to provide your perspective on how the project was developed and presented." I walked them through the entire process, from the initial research phase through the final presentation. I explained how I had developed the methodology, conducted the analysis, and created the presentation materials. I also described the working relationship with Richard and how departmental work was typically handled and presented. Sandra took detailed notes throughout my explanation. "Have there been other instances where your work has been presented without proper attribution?" she asked. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "Yes, there have been several smaller projects over the past year where I did the primary analysis, and Richard presented the results as his own work. I understood this to be part of the normal hierarchy, where supervisors present departmental work to senior management. But in this case," James interjected, "Richard explicitly presented the work as his own original analysis. not as departmental work or team effort. That's correct, I confirmed. He took individual credit for the specific methodology and insights. The meeting concluded with Sandra explaining that they would be conducting a comprehensive review of the situation, and that I should continue preparing for my board presentation. She assured me that the company took these matters seriously and that my professional interests would be protected. As I left the HR office, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The truth was being officially documented and investigated, but I also knew that this process would likely have significant consequences for Richard and potentially for the entire department structure. The rest of Monday passed in a strange atmosphere of anticipation. Richard was noticeably absent from the office, and rumors were starting to circulate among my colleagues. Jake approached me during lunch and asked directly if something was happening with the Pacific Northwest Energy Project. I can't really discuss it, I told him, but there might be some changes in how the project is being handled. Tuesday morning arrived with the crisp energy of a pivotal day. I dressed carefully in my best professional attire, a navy blue suit that conveyed authority without being flashy, and my lucky pearl earrings that had been a graduation gift from my mother. I arrived at the office early to review my presentation one final time and ensure all my materials were perfectly organized. At 9 a.m., I received an email from Rebecca asking me to come to the executive floor 30 minutes before the board meeting. When I arrived, I found Margaret Chen waiting for me in her office, along with David Rodriguez, the CFO. Sage, before we go into the board meeting, I want to update you on some changes, Margaret said. Richard Hartwell is no longer with the company. His employment was terminated yesterday after our investigation confirmed that he had been systematically taking credit for subordinates' work. Not just yours, but several other team members as well. I felt a complex mix of emotions: vindication, relief, and surprisingly, a touch of sadness. Richard had been a poor manager and had treated me unfairly, but seeing someone lose their job was never easy. Additionally, David continued, we're restructuring the department. We're promoting you to Senior Strategy Director, reporting directly to the executive team. Your compensation will be adjusted accordingly, and you'll have your own team to manage. I was stunned. In the space of a week, I had gone from being an invisible analyst to being offered a director-level position. The transformation was almost overwhelming. The board meeting today will serve as your introduction to the Pacific Northwest Energy executives in your new role, Margaret explained. They've been briefed on the situation and are eager to work directly with the person who developed the strategy they're implementing. The board presentation went flawlessly. I presented my analysis with confidence and authority, fielding questions from both the Cromwell and Partners board members and the Pacific Northwest Energy executives. The clients were particularly impressed by my deep understanding of their industry and my ability to explain complex analytical concepts in accessible terms. After the meeting, several board members approached me personally to congratulate me on the work and welcome me to the senior leadership team. Patricia Williams, the Pacific Northwest Energy CEO, even mentioned that she was interested in having me consult on their other strategic initiatives. As I walked back to my desk, soon to be my office, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. A week ago, I had been a frustrated analyst watching someone else take credit for my work. Today, I was a director with my own team and direct access to the executive leadership. The lesson wasn't just about standing up for myself or fighting for recognition. It was about the power of letting your work speak for itself, and the importance of maintaining professionalism even when facing unfair treatment. I had chosen to reveal the truth through the quality of my work rather than through accusations or confrontation, and that approach had led to a better outcome than I could have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, my best friend who had listened to me vent about Richard's behavior for months. Saw the company announcement about your promotion. I'm so proud of you. Dinner tonight to celebrate? I smiled as I typed back, absolutely. And I have quite a story to tell you. As I began cleaning out my desk to move to my new office, I noticed Jake watching me with an expression of amazement and respect. I always knew you were doing the real work, he said quietly. I'm glad someone finally noticed. The digital trail that had started with simple file names had led to a complete transformation of my career. Sometimes justice comes not through dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet persistence of truth and the power of documentation. In the corporate world, as in life, the details matter, and the people who pay attention to those details are the ones who ultimately succeed. My new office had the same view of Elliott Bay that I had admired from the conference room, but now I would see it every day. As I looked out at the water, I thought about all the late nights, all the unrecognized work, all the moments when I had questioned whether my efforts were worth it. Today, I had my answer. The file names had told the story, but the real story was about persistence, professionalism, and the courage to let your work speak for itself. In the end, that had been more powerful than any accusation or confrontation could have been.